This morning, we're holding a confirmation hearing on the nomination of Alexander Acosta to serve as United States Secretary of Labor. Senator Murray and I will each have an opening statement, then we'll introduce our witness. We're delighted to have Senator Rubio with us. Senator Cruz is coming. And after our witness testimony, senators will each have 2 5-minute rounds of questions. Just 10 years ago, in 2007, Steve Jobs announced that Apple had reinvented the mobile phone, just 10 years ago. A microblogging company named Twitter gained its own separate platform and started to scale globally, and Amazon released something called Kindle. All that in 2007, just 10 years ago. The same year, IBM began to build a computer called Watson that within a few years defeated human contestants in the Jeopardy TV show. And in 2007, the cost of sequencing a genome started falling from $100 million in 2001 to $1,000 in 2015. In a new book, New York Times columnist Tom Friedman puts his finger on the year 2007, just 10 years ago, as, quote, the technological inflection point. He uses the term great acceleration for all of the technological, social, environmental, and market changes simultaneously sweeping across the globe, and argues we're living, quote, through one of the great inflection points in history as a result. Add to that Ball State University's finding that automation is responsible for the loss of 88% of manufacturing jobs, and globalization, add that. Add social, cultural, climate changes, and terrorism, you get a big mismatch between the change of pace and ability of the average American worker to keep up and fit into the accelerating forces shaping the workplace. A few weeks ago, a group of senators sat around in a forum and listened to some very smart scientists talk about their advances in artificial intelligence. And after it was all over, one senator asked, "Where are we all going to work?" Tom Friedman says that probably the most important governance challenge is the great, quote, need to develop the learning systems, the training systems, the management systems, the social safety nets, and government regulations that would enable citizens to get the most out of these accelerations and cushion their worst impacts, unquote. One of the federal government's chief actors in this drama of acceleration should be the Secretary of Labor. In fact, as many have suggested and the House of Representatives has done, the title of the job for which Alexander Acosta has been nominated should be changed to be Secretary of the Workforce, not Secretary of Labor. Labor union membership in the private economy today is down to less than 7%. The issue for workers today is not whether they belong to a union, it's whether they have the skills to adapt to a changing marketplace and find and keep a job. To be accurate, to create and keep a job. My generation found jobs. This generation's more likely to have to create their own jobs. In his inaugural address, President Trump said he heard forgotten men and women who are struggling to keep up and fit into the changing world. In his farewell address, President Obama said he heard the same voices. Too many families in inner cities and in rural counties who have been left behind, he said. What can we do about it? The most important thing is to work with employers and community colleges and technical institutes and find ways to increase the number of Americans earning post-secondary certificates and 2-year degrees or more. Georgetown University says that by 2020, 65% of the jobs in this country will require some college or more. And at the rate we're going, Georgetown predicts the United States will lack 5 million workers with an adequate post-secondary education by 2020. Unfortunately, too many of the federal government's actions over the last few years have made it harder for the American workers to keep up, adjust, and create and find and keep a job. To begin with, the Obama administration unleashed a regulatory avalanche that held job creators back. President Obama's Department of Labor issued 130% more final rules than the previous administration's Labor Department, an average of 85 major rules with more than $100 million impact on the economy compared with President Bush's 62 a year. Take the overtime rule. In my state, its cost would add hundreds of dollars per student in college tuition and would force small businesses to reduce the jobs that provide stability families need. Or the joint employer rule and its attack on franchising, or the fiduciary rule that makes it more expensive for the average worker to obtain investment advice. One after one, a big wet blanket of costs and time-consuming mandates on job creators. There's the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's EEO-1 form, requiring employers to provide to the government 20 times as much information as they do today about how they pay workers. There's the ridiculously complex 108-question FAFSA, which I know the dean is well aware of, the federal aid application form that turns away from college many of the people who ought to be going, and the Affordable Care Act, which defined full-time work as only 30 hours, forcing employers to cut their workers' hours or reduce hiring altogether. Many of these, like the Persuader Rule, which chills the ability of employers to retain legal advice during union organizing activities, seem designed for the purpose of strengthening the membership and power of labor unions. We're fortunate today to have a presidential nominee for labor secretary who understands how a good-paying job is critical to helping workers realize the American dream for themselves and for their families. Senator Rubio and Senator Cruz will introduce him in detail, so I will not. But I do want to recognize that after immigrating to Miami from Cuba, Mr. Acosta's parents worked hard to create more opportunities for their son. He's the first person in his family to go to college. He's been on the NLRB, an assistant attorney general for the Justice Department, a U.S. attorney. He's dean of Florida International University's law school. His school's president describes him as conscientious, thoughtful, says he doesn't overreach, and he's already been confirmed 3 times by the United States Senate. So, Mr. Acosta, we welcome you today, and I look forward to hearing more on your ideas about how to help American workers adjust to the changing conditions in our workforce. Senator Murray.